and the winter sun was pale, nothing more than a smudge behind a veil of smoke. Jaehaen trudged across the frozen earth, a sack of brittle corn husks slung over his shoulder. His breath came in ragged clouds, each step sinking into soil that had long since given up on life. The fields were bare, the barns empty. Only the sound of his stomach gnawing at itself reminded him he was still alive. Back in their one-room hut, his mother bent over a dented pot, stirring what could hardly be called soup. A thin slurry of boiled weeds floated in gray water. The smell was sour, but Hannah's younger sister watched the pot with feverish eyes, her lips cracked and colorless. She was 12, yet her body was as fragile as a child's. Her ribs protruded beneath her patched dress, and each cough seemed to shake her like a storm rattling dry branches. "Eat slowly," their mother whispered when the bowls were passed. But hunger devoured caution. Hannah lifted hers with trembling hands. Spilling more than she swallowed, Jaehaen forced himself to eat in measured gulps, watching her with a tightness in his chest. Every day she grew lighter when he carried her on his back to the village well. Every day he wondered if this would be her last. The streets offered no solace. Families crouched near the market, trading scraps of cloth for kernels of corn. Men, with hollow eyes, staggered past like ghosts, their dignity long stripped away. The party officials still strutted through with full bellies, their leather coats gleaming, their children with round faces. Jaehaen hated them with a heat that scared him, yet he knew better than to let it show. Once years ago, his father had muttered something at the dinner table about the leader's lies. The next morning, he was gone, taken under the cover of darkness. No explanation, no grave, only the silence of neighbors who knew and dared not speak. Since then, silence had been their family's only shield. That night, as the wind clawed through cracks in the walls, Jaehaen lay awake listening to Hannah's shallow breaths. The hunger was an ache, but worse was the helplessness. He could work himself to the bone in the coal depot, but nothing he earned could stop his sister from withering away. His mother's voice, low and steady in the dark, reached him. "You must endure, Jaehaen. For her." He closed his eyes, swallowing the bitterness of obedience. Endurance was all that life seemed to demand of them. Endure hunger, endure silence, endure loss. But as Hannah's breathing faltered beside him, Jaehaen felt something shift. Hunger was no longer just an ache, it was a fire, pushing him toward thoughts too dangerous to speak. Somewhere beyond the river, he told himself, food was real, and life was not measured in silence. Somewhere beyond this cage, there was a chance his sister might live. And for the first time, Jaehaen began to wonder if enduring was no longer enough. The coal depot was a place of ash and shadows. Jaehaen's hands were perpetually blackened, the soot ground so deep into his skin that even cold river water could not wash it away. He hauled sacks heavier than his own body, bent his spine beneath the weight, and kept his mouth shut. Men who complained too loudly disappeared, sometimes taken away by police trucks, sometimes buried alive under a work accident. Everyone knew better than to question. Still, even in silence, whispers found their way between men like him, hungry, desperate, broken, but not yet destroyed. It was there, in the depot's back corner, that he first overheard the word that would coil itself into his mind like forbidden fire. Smugglers. The voice was a murmur, almost lost beneath the clang of shovels. Two men squatted low, their bodies thin as scarecrows. One spoke of neighbors who had crossed into China, led by guides who knew the river's shallow bends. Another muttered of safe houses, of food, of a chance to breathe air without a soldier's boot on your throat. Jaehaen pretended not to hear. His pulse, however, betrayed him hammering fast enough he feared they would notice. He had heard rumors before, always laced with fear. Smugglers were saviors to some, traitors to others. Many defectors never made it past the border at all. Some were caught in the icy current. Others were betrayed and dragged back in chains. That night, lying beside Hannah, he studied her face in the dim glow of the dying fire. She was thinner than ever, her cheeks hollow, her eyes sunken. A single thought tore through him. If he stayed, she would not live to see spring. The following week, as snow fell in silent flakes, Jaehaen dared to ask one of the men at the depot about the smugglers. The man's eyes darted around before leaning in close. His breath stank of hunger. "They can take you across," he whispered. But the price. He rubbed two fingers together. Money. Something Jahan did not have. How much Jahan forced himself to ask. Everything. Gold, yuan, even jewelry. They don't care what it is, only that you pay. Jahan felt the weight of despair settle on him. His family owned nothing of worth. His father's absence had left them poorer than beggars. All he had were his hands and the gnawing need to save Hannah. When he returned home, his mother was waiting, her eyes sharp despite the weariness. She had noticed the restlessness in him. "You've been listening," she said, her voice low. "To dangerous men." Jahan said nothing, but his silence was enough. She reached for his hand, her grip trembling but fierce. "Do not let desperation blind you, son. Those who promise freedom often sell only death." Her warning clung to him, but so did Hannah's fragile breathing. And as dawn broke over the barren hills, Jahan knew the whispers of escape would not leave him. They were no longer whispers, they were a call. The meeting was arranged in silence, as all dangerous things were. A man from the depot, eyes hollow but sharp, slipped Jahan a name one morning while they shoveled coal. No one else heard it. No one else could. That night, Jahan walked beyond the village, where the skeletal remains of trees stood like blackened ribs against the winter sky. He found them watching a pair of men, with faces that carried no warmth, only calculation. Their coats were patched, but their boots were too fine to belong to common laborers. They did not smile. "You're looking to cross," the taller one said, his accent carrying a southern lilt. Jahan's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, but what use was denial when they already knew? He gave a single nod. The shorter smuggler stepped closer, his breath fogging in the cold. "Do you have money? Jewelry? Anything worth the risk?" "I have nothing," Jahan admitted, his voice cracking. "But I will work. I'll carry loads, chop wood, anything. Sister, she's dying. If I stay, she won't survive the winter." For the first time, a flicker of something crossed the taller man's face. Not compassion, but calculation. He exchanged a glance with his companion. "Work has value," he said slowly. "But crossing isn't charity. It's danger. Every step could kill us. Soldiers patrol the river. Floodlights sweep the banks. One mistake, and we're all corpses in the water." Jahan's heart hammered. He lowered his head, desperate. "Then let me pay later. China. I will work for you. Anything. Just help me take her across." The smugglers were silent. The shorter one lit a cigarette, the glow illuminating his gaunt cheeks. Smoke curled in the icy air as he finally spoke. "Desperation makes a man valuable. Will do." Relief surged through Jahan so quickly it left him weak. He bowed, muttering thanks, though his hands still trembled. But the taller smuggler leaned in, his eyes sharp. "Understand this, boy. Once you step with us, there is no turning back. If you falter, if you draw attention, we'll leave you behind. Or worse. Do you understand?" Jahan swallowed hard and nodded. The men disappeared into the darkness as suddenly as they had come, leaving him with only the echo of their words. He trudged home under a sky full of indifferent stars, his heart torn between hope and dread. His mother noticed the change the moment he entered the hut. She studied his face as he knelt beside Hannah, who slept restlessly on their straw mat. "You found them," she whispered, her tone heavy with both fear and resignation. Jahan could not meet her gaze. He only pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around Hannah's frail shoulders and whispered to himself, "I will save you." But deep inside, a shadow lingered because the smuggler's promise had felt less like salvation, and more like a trap tightening around him. The days that followed moved with unbearable slowness. Each morning, Jahan left for the depot with the same hollow expression, but inside a storm raged. Every shovelful of coal, every shout from the overseer only sharpened his determination. The smuggler's words gnawed at him, no turning back. At night he sat by Hannah's side, pretending to sleep while listening to her shallow breaths. She was shrinking before his eyes, her wrists no thicker than twigs, her voice a whisper that sometimes failed altogether. He wanted to scoop her up and carry her across the border that very night, but he knew one misstep would doom them all. His mother watched him with the eyes of someone who had already lost too much. One evening, as she patched a torn blanket, she said, "When you were little, Your father dreamed of crossing too. He thought of it every day after the famine took your cousins. But he never told anyone, except me. Jae-hyun froze. His father's disappearance had always been a wound that no words could close. Did the police take him because of that? Her hands trembled. She didn't answer, and the silence was enough. Jae-hyun swallowed hard. Then I will finish what he couldn't. Her eyes filled with tears, though she forced them back. If you go, there may be no return. You know what happens if they catch you? Torture. Prison camps. You'll pray for death before it comes. I know, he whispered, his throat raw. Oh, but if I stay, Hannah won't live another season. And then what? We just wait for death here? The words shattered the brittle quiet between them. His mother's face crumpled, but she reached for his hand, squeezing hard, as though to anchor him to this life for one more moment. That night, while Hannah slept, he whispered to her dreams. We're going somewhere better, little sister. You'll eat rice until you're full. You'll see lights that never go out. Just hold on. She stirred faintly, her lips moving. Don't leave me. His chest ached as he brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Ever he promised. Though he knew promises were fragile things, easily broken by bullets or betrayal. The next morning, he gathered the few things they owned: a ragged scarf, a dented tin cup, a pair of wool socks long since patched with straw. His mother placed a small cloth bundle in his hand. Inside were 2 coins and a sliver of jade from her wedding pendant, all she had managed to save. Bribes, she whispered. Sometimes bribes keep you alive. Her hand lingered on his cheek, her eyes memorizing him, as though she feared she would never see him again. Jae-hyun tried to memorize her toothlines carved by years of hunger, the quiet strength that had carried them through every famine. When he stepped outside into the biting air, he felt the weight of goodbye settle on his shoulders, heavier than any sack of coal. The night chosen was moonless, the sky smothered by thick clouds. Darkness was their only ally. Jae-hyun carried Hannah in his arms, her body so light it frightened him. She buried her face in his chest, shivering not only from the cold but from fear. His mother stayed behind in the hut, her tears silent as she watched them leave. She had not begged him to stay, perhaps because she knew there was no choice left. The smugglers led them through the hills, moving like shadows. Every crunch of snow beneath their boots sounded too loud, every breath a cloud of betrayal. They passed abandoned farms and skeletal trees, the land as starved as its people. Ahead, the black ribbon of the river stretched out, frozen in places, but alive beneath. Its current a silent predator. Stay close, the taller smuggler hissed, and not a sound. A small group had gathered for others besides. Jae-hyun and Hannah. A woman with hollow cheeks clutched a boy no older than 8. An old man leaned heavily on a cane. All wore the same expression. Terror, mixed with the faintest trace of hope. When they reached the riverbank, Jae-hyun's breath caught. Soldiers patrolled the opposite shore, their silhouettes moving against the faint glow of a watchtower. Floodlights swept in rhythmic arcs, cutting the darkness like blades. The shorter smuggler crouched low, pointing toward a narrow bend where reeds jutted through the ice. There, the current's weaker. We cross fast, one at a time. Jae-hyun tightened his grip on Hannah. Her lips were blue already, and they hadn't yet touched the water. He whispered, "Hold on, little sister. Just a little longer." The first crosser was the old man. The smugglers pushed him forward, and he shuffled onto the ice, each step a groan of cracking protest. Halfway across, he slipped, crashing onto his knees. For a moment, the group froze, but no soldiers stirred. By sheer will, the man dragged himself onward, disappearing into the reeds on the far side. Next went the woman and her boy. They moved quickly, fear driving them, until the boy stumbled. Jae-hyun's heart clenched, but the woman yanked her son up and half-dragged him across. They too vanished into the shadows. Then it was Jae-hyun's turn. The taller smuggler's eyes bored into him. Quiet, or she dies. Jae-hyun stepped onto the ice. It groaned beneath his weight, thin cracks snaking out like veins of glass. Each step was agony. He held Hannah high, her frail arms looped around his neck, her breath shallow against his skin. The cold bit through his boots, numbing his feet until he couldn't tell if he was walking or floating. Every second felt stretched, every sweep of the floodlight a noose ready to tighten. At last, the reeds loomed ahead. Relief surged through him until a shout tore the night, a soldier's voice, sharp and vicious. The smuggler shoved Jae-hyun forward. "Run, And so he did, clutching Hannah as the ice beneath him groaned, and the river, the soldiers, and fate itself seemed ready to swallow him whole. They made it across. Jaehyun collapsed onto the frozen reeds, clutching Hannah, his chest heaving, his feet numb beyond feeling. Around him, the woman sobbed into her boy's hair. The old man knelt, muttering prayers to a god Jaehyun had never been taught to believe in. The smugglers didn't rest. The taller one hissed, "Move," prodded them inland. Jaehyun obeyed, stumbling on weak legs, Hannah limp in his arms. He thought the worst was over the ice, the soldiers, the floodlights, but a darker danger waited beyond the river. After an hour's march, they stopped near a stand of bare trees. The shorter smuggler lit another cigarette, his face lit orange in the dark. He spoke with an ease that chilled Jaehyun. "You did well, crossing. But freedom isn't free." The words didn't register at first. Jaehyun blinked, confused. You said I could work for you. In China." The taller man's laugh was low and humorless. "Work? You've got nothing. No money, no family connections. You're a burden, but burdens can be exchanged." The woman with the boy stepped forward, desperation sharp in her voice. "Please, we can repay you." "My cousin in Yanji, he will." The smuggler silenced her with a glare. "Quiet. You'll do as you're told." Then Jaehyun understood. These men weren't guides. They were traders, or not of goods, but of flesh. Refugees like him were currency to be sold back to the border guards, or worse, trafficked into lives of slavery in China. His stomach turned to ice. He tightened his hold on Hannah, her fragile frame no match for the storm brewing around them. The shorter smuggler exhaled a plume of smoke. "Here's how it works. We bring you to the police. They give us a reward. You get sent back. Everybody wins." His grin was cruel. "Except you." The old man broke, falling to his knees. "Please, I can work. I was an engineer before." The taller smuggler kicked him to the ground. "Shut up." He thought of his mother's warning, her trembling hands pressing the jade into his palm. Sometimes bribes keep you alive. He dug into his pocket, pulling out the bundle. "I have this," he stammered. "Coins, Jade. Take it, just let us go." The smugglers paused, greed flickering in their eyes. The shorter one snatched the bundle, weighed it in his palm, then scoffed. "Not enough." Jaehyun's chest tightened. Hannah stirred weakly, whispering his name. He looked at her pale face and knew this wasn't an escape. It was a trade, and he and Hannah were nothing but commodities. The smugglers signaled, and from the darkness emerged two soldiers in heavy coats, rifles slung casually across their shoulders. Jaehyun's blood ran cold. The trap was complete. For the first time since the journey began, he realized the river had not been the true test. This was, and there was no path forward, only betrayal closing in on all sides. The Korean soldiers moved with a cruel efficiency. Their boots crunched in the frost as they closed in, rifles gleaming in the dim light. Jaehyun clutched Hannah tighter, but one soldier ripped her from his arms with a single jerk. She cried out, weak and pitiful, her voice barely more than a whisper. "No," Jaehyun lunged, but the other soldier drove the butt of his rifle into his stomach. The air left his lungs in a ragged gasp as he crumpled to the ground, dirt and blood filling his mouth. The woman with the boy tried to flee into the trees, but the shorter smuggler caught her by the hair, dragging her back screaming. The child clawed at his mother's captor, only to be flung aside into the snow. The old man remained where he had fallen, trembling, tears streaking his hollow cheeks. Jaehyun tried to rise, but a boot pressed hard onto his neck, grinding his face into the frozen ground. He tasted iron and soil, humiliation searing deeper than pain. Above him, the Korean soldiers spoke casually to the smugglers, exchanging words like traders at a market. Then, with a laugh, one soldier tossed a pouch that jingled into the taller smuggler's hands. Payment, the price of their lives. Hannah whimpered as she was shoved back toward Jaehyun, her small body shivering violently. He pulled her close again, his arms trembling not from cold, but from helpless rage. The Korean soldiers barked orders, forcing the captives into a line. Hands bound with coarse rope, they were marched back toward the river they had just crossed. The smugglers did not follow. They had already vanished into the night, richer by betrayal. As they trudged, Jaehaen's thoughts churned. He remembered his father's whispers of escape, of hope, silence forever. He remembered his mother's face when she pressed the jade into his palm. He had failed her, failed Hannah, and now the punishment would be more than just death. At the riverbank, the patrol tower loomed like a black sentinel. The floodlights carved the night open, exposing their broken bodies, their shame. Korean soldiers on the North Korean side shouted across the water, voices sharp with authority. Orders crackled back and forth, and then the captives were shoved into a boat, forced to sit in silence as the current dragged them toward the land they had tried to leave behind. Jaehaen held Hannah against him, feeling her fragile heartbeat flutter like a trapped bird. She whispered, "Oppa, don't let them." Her words faded into the cold wind, unfinished. He kissed her hair, tasting salt and frost. "I won't," he lied, because lies were all he had left to give her. As the boat bumped against the shore of home no, of prison Ja, you knew they had crossed not into safety, but into hell. The detention center squatted on the edge of the border town like a scar. Its walls were high, crowned with coils of rusted barbed wire. Smoke from a nearby factory mixed with the stench of sewage, choking the air. As the captives were herded inside, Jaehaen realized this was not a place for reform. It was a warehouse for breaking human beings. The Korean soldiers stripped them of everything: belts, shoes, even scraps of cloth that could be traded or hidden. Jaehaen clung to Hannah's hand until a guard tore her away, shoving her into a separate line with the women and children. Her terrified eyes searched for him, but before he could speak, a blow from a rifle butt sent him sprawling. They were marched into a cold room, its walls stained with mold, the floor damp. A portrait of the deer leader stared down from above, its painted smile grotesque in the flickering light. Guards barked orders. Kneel, heads bowed, hands behind necks. Anyone who hesitated was struck until they bled. Interrogations began. Prisoners were dragged out one by one, their screams echoing through the corridors. When Jaehaen's turn came, 2 guards pulled him into a narrow chamber. The officer behind the desk wore a pressed uniform, his face smooth, his eyes dead. "Why did you cross the river?" the officer asked, voice deceptively calm. Jaehaen swallowed hard. "For work, to feed my sister." The officer leaned forward. "So you admit you betrayed the Republic? You sought the poison of foreign influence?" Jaehaen shook his head. "No, I only wanted food." The guards struck him until stars burst in his vision. His answers didn't matter. Truth was irrelevant here. Confession was demanded. Guilt assumed. Each denial earned another blow. Hours blurred into pain. He confessed to crimes he hadn't committed, meeting foreign spies, plotting escape, dishonoring the dear leader. Lies poured from his lips because silence meant death. When they dragged him back to the holding cell, his face was swollen, his body shaking. He searched for Hannah, but she wasn't there. Panic clawed at him. The woman with the boy whispered that the children had been taken to another ward. No one knew if they would return. Nights in the cell were endless. The prisoners huddled together for warmth, whispering fragments of hope, fragments of despair. Some prayed, some cursed. Others stared blankly at the wall, already hollowed out. Jaehaen clutched the memory of Hannah's voice like a lifeline. He promised himself he would endure, no matter the beatings, no matter the hunger. For her, always for her. But in the silence of the dark, he wondered, would she still be alive when he saw her again, or had she already been swallowed by the machine that had consumed his father? Days bled into weeks inside the re-education camp. Time was measured not in hours, but in beatings, in bowls of watery corn gruel, in the rasping coughs of those who grew too weak to rise at roll call. Men and women vanished from the barracks, dragged away for correction and never returned. Jaehaen's body shrank, ribs jutting sharply beneath his skin. His hands blistered from forced labor hauling stones, breaking ice, digging frozen soil with tools that bent more than they cut. The guards watched with idle cruelty, sometimes striking prisoners not for disobedience but for the simple joy of reminding them who held power. Still Jaehaen endured. He carried a single ember within him, Hannah. One morning, while limping back from the work fields, he glimpsed her across the courtyard. She was thinner, her hair matted, her face pale, but it was her. She clutched a chipped tin bowl and shuffled in line with the other children. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. She gave the smallest smile, fragile, fleeting, but real. It was enough to keep him breathing. Enough to remind him why he hadn't already let go. But the world within those walls thrived on extinguishing hope. A prisoner collapsed during labor one afternoon, his body refusing to move. The guards beat him until his bones cracked, then left him in the snow as a warning. The message was clear. Weakness was treason, compassion forbidden. That night, in the barracks, whispers spread of new transfers being prepared. Some said they were being moved to mines in the northeast. Others muttered of executions. The uncertainty gnawed at them more than hunger. Jaehyun pressed his back against the freezing wall, eyes closed, Hannah's smile replaying in his mind. He imagined her voice, imagined her hand in his. He whispered promises into the dark that he would find her, protect her, lead her to the life their parents had once dreamed of. A part of him knew. Promises meant little here. The camp swallowed fathers, mothers, children alike. It erased faces, erased names, until only obedience remained. One evening a guard called his name. His blood ran cold as he stepped forward. He expected chains, blows, another round of interrogation. Instead, he was shoved into a separate holding room with a handful of other prisoners. No explanation, just waiting. Through the thin wall, he heard children crying high, trembling voices, pressed his ear against the boards, straining to hear Hannah. Every sound stabbed his heart with equal parts hope and dread. The ember flickered weakly. Perhaps tomorrow he'd see her again. Perhaps tomorrow would be the end. He didn't know which fate terrified him more. The dawn broke gray over the camp, though no one inside could see the sun. Only the guards knew it was morning, their boots clattering down the corridors, their orders sharp and cold. Jaehyun and the others in the holding room were dragged outside, lined up beneath the watchtower. The frost bit into their bare feet, but fear numbed them more than cold. A truck waited by the gates. Prisoners were shoved aboard, packed together like sacks of grain. The engine roared, drowning out the whimpers of children. Jaehyun's heart leaped when he saw Hannah being lifted into the back, as well her small face pale, her eyes half closed. He reached for her, forcing his way through the press of bodies until his hand found hers. She clung weakly, her fingers fragile as bird bones. The ride was long and silent, broken only by the coughs and sobs of the damned. No one knew where they were being taken, but each bump in the road felt like a nail driven deeper into fate. At last, the truck stopped before a valley swallowed in fog. Korean soldiers ordered them down. Some prisoners collapsed, too weak to stand. They were beaten to their feet. Jaehyun held Hannah close, whispering promises he knew were lies. A pit yawned before them, fresh earth piled high on the side, the stench of decay unmistakable. The truth struck harder than any blow. This was no transfer. It was the end. Panic rippled through the group. A woman screamed for mercy, clinging to her child. A man dropped to his knees, begging for one more chance. The guards ignored them all, rifles raised, faces blank. Jaehyun's arms tightened around Hannah. She looked up at him, her lips trembling. "Appa, will we see Mama again?" His throat closed. His tears blurred his vision, but he forced a nod. "Yes, soon. She's waiting for us." The words cracked inside him. But Hannah smiled faintly, resting her head against his chest. The Korean soldiers began their work. Gunfire split the morning, each shot cutting down a life. Bodies fell into the pit like discarded shadows. The screams blurred into one long, unending wail. Jaehyun pressed Hannah's face into his chest, shielding her from the sight. He whispered her name over and over, like a prayer, like a spell. For a moment, time slowed the frost on her eyelashes, the shallow rise and fall of her breath, the warmth of her against him. Then the world exploded in sound and fire. Silence followed. When the pit was covered, no trace remained of those who had once dreamed of rivers and freedom, of families whole again. Only the wind carried their story, scattering it beyond the barbed wire, across the land they had never truly left. The dawn had broken. But it was broken for them alone.